Hi, everyone. This is Psych 201, General Psychology, Chapter 5, Cognitive Learning. To remind you, the cognitive perspective in psychology refers to those processes that go on between your ears, meaning that cognition includes thinking, knowing, judging, problem solving, and remembering. In the 1950s and 1960s, the cognitive perspective was coming into its own. It was very popular, and people were really beginning to research those cognitive processes that go on in your head. And it began to dominate experimental psychology at that time. So here we are going to explore two kinds of cognitive learning. The first one is latent learning, and the second one is insight learning. Edward Tolman put forth latent learning. He emphasized the purposiveness of behavior, which means the idea that much of behavior is goal-directed. He believed that it is necessary to study entire behavioral sequences in order to understand why people engage in certain actions. Tolman emphasized that the information value of the conditioned stimulus is important as a signal or an expectation that an unconditioned stimulus will follow. Latent learning, then, is unreinforced learning that is not immediately reflected in behavior. Tolman demonstrated latent learning in rats in his classic maze experiment. He used 3 groups of rats and let them explore a maze. One group received a reward of food for reaching goals in the maze. One group received no reinforcers, and another was given no reward until the 11th day of the experiment. Rats getting treats ran the maze more quickly as time progressed. Rats that received no rewards made little progress. When the third group began getting treats, they ran the maze as quickly as the rats that had been rewarded the entire time, showing that they had been learning the maze, but not using this knowledge until they needed it. And they needed it to get treats. This challenged Skinner's and other behaviorists' strict views of learning as shown only by observable behaviors. Today, most psychologists agree that measurable behaviors, as well as unseen cognitive processes, are necessary elements of learning. So, the bottom line is that according to Tolman's latent learning, we can learn things just by hanging out. These things don't necessarily need to be reinforced. We pick up information, and we don't necessarily use it until we need it. And this is what he meant by latent learning. Another kind of cognitive learning was put forth by Wolfgang Kohler. He called his insight learning. Insight learning is a form of problem solving in which the organism develops a sudden insight into or understanding of a problem's solution. Now, here, a solution to a problem will come quickly. It's not going to happen through trial and error. It requires thinking outside the box, and when the solution comes to you, it's like having an aha moment. When we say thinking outside the box, what we mean is that you set aside previous expectations and assumptions and allow yourself to think in more novel ways. And thus, you will come about these solutions that are unique and give you the aha moment. What Kohler did to demonstrate this theory of learning is, as you see in the picture, he used chimpanzees, put them in one by one in an empty room, hung their food from the ceiling out of reach. One of the trials, he put 2 fruit crates in the room, just randomly in the room. The chimps were not familiar with fruit crates. This was not part of their environment. So this was something new to them. He put the chimps one by one in the room with the fruit crates to see what they would do to get food. And as you see in the picture, they would use insight learning. They would drag the fruit crates over to where the fruit was hanging, stack one on top of the other, climb on top, and retrieve the fruit. Again, this was not something that they knew to do from their environment. This was thinking outside of the box, no pun intended, for them. Another variation on this was that Kohler put a fruit crate and a stick, but it was not a branch. It was a milled stick, like a wooden curtain rod. Again, these were not things the chimps were familiar with from their environment, but it was the same scenario. Fruit was hung from the ceiling. Chimps could not reach it without help. The room was empty except for the fruit crate and the stick. Here, chimps would drag the fruit crate over up under the fruit. They would stand on top of the fruit crate, grab the stick, and swing it like they were swinging at a piñata and knock the fruit down. So Kohler said that, again, this was a demonstration of thinking outside of the box to solve a problem. And this was indeed insight learning. Another type of learning that we have that sometimes is categorized as a cognitive kind of learning. Other times it's categorized as a little bit more behavioral. So it's kind of, it depends on who you read as to where learned helplessness gets categorized. But this was formulated by Martin Seligman, and he was studying escape and avoidance learning. And he coined the term learned helplessness as the failure to act or escape from a situation. He then related it to depression in humans by saying that sometimes humans become depressed when they just take so many hard knocks from their environment. And it's just one thing after the other, one loss after another, to the point where a person just gives up. They stop trying to fight back and just become totally depressed and helpless to help themselves. So the experiment that Seligman did was with dogs, and he fashioned sort of a dog-size Skinner box. On one side, the floor had the shot grid, as you see here, and the other side was not fitted out with shocks. He had two kinds of partitions. One, like you see here, that has an escape hatch, and another that was completely solid. So he would take the dogs and have them go into the first side of the box, and he would then turn the grid on. Part of the dogs would have this escape hatch. He would turn the grid on and they would fuss because it was uncomfortable. They would try to get out, and they saw that they could not get out through the top or from the sides. But they saw that, oh, they had this escape hatch, so they jumped to the other side. In the next variation, he put up the solid middle part. The dogs go in as usual. He turned on the grid. They whined, they tried to get out, but there was no escape hatch. Eventually, the dogs just sat down and took those uncomfortable shocks. The next go round, Seligman took the dogs who had the solid center panel, the ones that could not escape, and the ones that sat down and took it. Took those dogs. He replaced the solid panel with the escape hatch, put the dogs in one by one. It was clear that there was an escape hatch there. He turned on the floor, the shock grids on the floor, and instead of these dogs jumping through the escape hatch to the other side, they just gave up and sat down and took it. So for Seligman, he was saying that that group of dogs had learned helplessness. They learned to just give up. And it extended to where even when there was an escape, they gave up.